Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about the Netflix television show Bridgerton. Now, before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, succitura in principio et nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. The reason I want to do an episode on the Netflix show Bridgerton is for a couple reasons. One, they just dropped season 2. And two, I think it gives a glimpse into a better day, a better time of intersexual dynamics and dating. So we're really not going to cover the plot points of that show because it would make this video really long. I will tell you it's a movie that takes place or a show that takes place in Regency, England. So it's about like 1819. And essentially, in short, it's about a family of 8 siblings. In season 1 is the eldest daughter, Daphne, is being debuted to society to get married off. And season 2, it's the eldest son, Anthony, who's the Viscount, and it's his turn to find a wife. And why I think this show is important to watch is for a couple of things. Now, let me preface this. It does have some sex scenes in it, especially season 1. Season 2 doesn't really have not a lot of sex. Maybe season 1 it's to grab you in, which is the HBO ploy. HBO shows always season 1, they put tons of stuff in it. So I just want you to know that there's no profanity, but there is some graphic sexual stuff in season 1 especially. So the reason why I think this show is important is a couple of things. One, it shows SMV or sexual market value at its rawest, purest form. It strips away all the nonsense that you see today. So what makes a woman a high sexual market value woman? Virtue and virginity. Okay, and these are two things that was very common for hundreds, if not millennia, in every society, but certainly in the West, is women, when they were debuted, ready to marry, the expectation is that they were virgins, that they were chaste. And the show Bridgerton is a good example of showing like how precarious a woman's reputation can fall for the most harmless things that if you think about it nowadays, it's laughable. Daphne, for example, is walking in the gardens at night at a party. And if she is found to be talking to a man, or even in season 2, where Anthony is found to be embracing a woman, they would have to get married to avoid scandal. That's how important it was for a woman to protect her virtue. And so you look like Anthony is the eldest son, but he's also the father figure because the father of the Bridgertons died. So his job is to protect the virtue of the daughters, including mainly Daphne, because Daphne is the main one of season 1. So you see like high SMV women, it's all about beauty, virtue, and chastity. The expectation is that they had to be virgins. If they were not virgins, their SMV would drop. So it's a very like stripped back. Like if you're beautiful, that's great. You're going to have a better chance of getting the high sexual market value man. But it was the expectation that all women were virgins, all of them. Now you could say that's a double standard because the expectation was that all the men were virgins. Of course not. Most of them would go into brawlers and so forth, and you can call it what it is for what it is. But we know the studies are pretty clear. The more sexual partners a woman has, the higher rate that she's going to be unfaithful, higher rate of divorce, higher rate of depression, anxiety, and other issues. And we've known this, right? The woman's the receiver of the act. And so as such, she releases more oxytocin and she absorbs the man literally into her body. So the more partners a woman has, the harder it is for her psychologically. And so they understood that on a primordial level all throughout time. So the understanding that a woman should be a virgin until marriage made sense. And you'd see the men in their lives protecting their virtue because they understood that the family's fortunes and the family's reputation would suffer if the women were not seen as reputable and virginal. This is what you still see in the Muslim world. So you see the honor killings when a woman fornicates, whatever. Sometimes in these traditional Muslim cultures, they will kill them, right? Because you're bringing, dishonor to the family. terms of male SMV, I mean, it's very stripped down. I mean, looks are somewhat important, but the main criteria for a high sexual market value for a man is, of course, the money. What we all know, like hypergamy, right? So if he's a duke, that's great. But if he's a prince, that's even better. If he's a viscount, that's not as good of a duke. But it's all about money, right? Because that taps into a woman's need for provisioning. So men, of course, want the young, the high S&P men can get the young, most beautiful, most virtue-laden virgins. Whereas if maybe you're a lower level, and you know, this episode's more about the aristocracy. We're not talking about the poor, the Dickensian poor of the time. But if you're looking, the men who don't have as much money or maybe have a lot of debt, they can't get the most beautiful woman. So you see everybody is like jockeying, and that's the beauty of Bridgerton, is you see how they all jockey to optimize the pairing up. Another thing you'll notice is dowries. I don't see this anymore, but dowries were very common. You still see sometimes in Indian culture, for example. But this idea of a woman, if a man's going to marry a woman, the expectation is that the woman's family is going to provide money or livestock or jewelry or something to go with her to be part of the inheritance. And you don't see this anymore at all. It's a throwback, but it would kind of entice the man. It's like, yeah, I'm going to give up my freedom, but why am I going to pick you? Well, you have a bigger dowry than XYZ lady. Another thing that you see is maid guarding. You don't really see this. You only see this kind of in the Muslim culture. But back then, you see it in Bridgerton, like they're promenading. There's always a man nearby. There's always a father figure or a brother figure or a friend anytime they're in public. Anytime, because again, you have to protect the virtue of the woman, and the number one way to do that is always have a chaperone. I talked about my mother dated in the 50s, and she had a chaperone. She was, you know, born and raised in Mexico, and she would always have a chaperone with her. Again, it's to protect the virtue of the woman, because that was held at the highest level. Whether you like it or not, it doesn't really matter, but that's how it was back then. So that was something that was very beneficial. The last thing I want to talk about that you kind of learn from Bridgerton is love really doesn't matter. Now, I'm not going to spoil it for you guys who do watch the show, but the two couples, Daphne and the Duke in season 1 and Antony and Kate in season 2, I can't tell you that they love each other. They don't love each other. It's like, you know, it's the classic kind of like Fabio Harlequin novel love. They share some views, they kiss each other, they glance, we're in love. Oh, mother, I'm in love. I need the queen's permission. We're in love. You're not in love. You just shared some glances. That's not love. It's all about like infatuation and so forth. Now, granted, it is a show, and so they have to play that up. But remember, most of human history, marriage was not based on if the person made you feel pitter-patter inside. We have an episode here, Romanticism Destroyed Matrimony. And the reasons to marry somebody were much more pragmatic. Marriage is a vocation, it's a job. You vet the person if you're going to marry somebody, and you pick somebody who has what? Virtue, character, integrity, all these things. And if it's a love match, what they keep talking about in Bridgerton, well, that's kind of like gravy, like cherry on top of the sundae. But any of the love matches they talk about in the show, it's just like there's no love. They're just infatuated. They're just horny for each other. I mean, there's no way that they're in love with each other when you encounter each other for such a short amount of time. But understand, marriage is not about the pitter-patter, because of course the pitter-patter is going to go away. And how many couples get married because they find each other attractive or they feel the pitter-patter, but their values are contrarian to each other and their interests are contrarian to each other. So that's not what you look at. And so what you see also in Bridgerton is the families having a say, right? Arranged marriages. Now some of you would say, oh, it's not fair for the woman, she's got to be married off. I understand that, but do we really want to be giving 18-year-olds the ability to choose who they're going to marry? No. And if you have kids, you realize definitely not. And you would see it like the parents would decide, like the parents could disinherit a kid who ran off and married the baker's son and stuff like that, because again, it affected the family and so forth. The marriage was essentially, as through human history, and we've talked about with homosexual marriage, is really meant for a stable order for the procreation of children. That's its number one thing. And also for legalistic things, property transfer, and other things that like that, like land and so forth, and keeping up the bloodlines and all that. But it wasn't meant for love. Love was not the number one thing. And now you see the problem where it's all about kind of the narcissistic, how does she make me feel? How does he make me feel? Oh, they make me feel good, I want to marry him. No, and that's not the best criteria for marriage. So I would tell you that Bridgerton kind of shows that too. So again, it's a show that's takes place 200 years ago, but it really shows you like how far we've gone in 21st century America and in the West, where there's no virgins. The idea of being a virgin now is laughed at. We live in that bizarro world where every virtue is a vice and every vice is a virtue. So if you find a 22-year-old virgin, it's like laughable, right? She's a loser, she's square, right? The other thing you see like in Bridgerton is like the very fast engagements. And this is what we used to do. This idea like we're going to get betrothed and wait 3 years to get married and hook up and cohabit together like we do now is just like unfathomable. They would never have done that. When the man was courting her and they'd see each other 4 or 5 times maybe, then he would propose, the family would decide if it was acceptable. If it was acceptable, they'd get married within the season, within a month or two. And it made sense because you want to prevent fornication and you just want to secure that, right? So you just see how like Bridgerton shows like a world that I would tell you as a man was a better world for both men and women, and certainly for marriage and for children. And so for that reason, I think you should watch it to kind of be sad in how far society has slid, but also to see how, it used to be and how it was for centuries. The way it was in 1819 Regency Europe was the way it was 1,000 years before that, 2,000 years before that. I'm not saying that nobody was having affairs or anything like that, but we had a much better understanding back then of the concept and purpose of matrimony. And I think we have lost that now, especially in the Tinder, narcissistic, solipsistic world that we live in. Guys, post in the comments. Let me know if you've watched Bridgerton. Please hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Share with other people. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.